difference, one cup at a time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time.
Well, welcome to Tea Time. That's right, Miss Liz is back, and we have the incredible Penelope Holt, and we're going to be talking about her incredible book, The Angel Scroll. And yes, Miss Liz has a choppy voice today, so it's a little crackly, but I'm fine, guys. I have my cup of tea here, and I'm all good. So before we get started, we're going to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel, and we're going to get you to ring that little doorbell so you can watch these tea times at any time, morning, afternoon, evening, in your car, in your home, at an event. All that good stuff. What does Miss Liz offer you? Well, I offer you over 300 plus interviews with incredible people from all walks of life, from all different globes. So let's get over with the disclaimer, and I'll do a little bit of the bio with Penelope, and then I'll get Penelope in here. And today's tea we're serving is Transform, Enlighten, and Action. And if you'd like to know more about Miss Liz's tea, you can check out the website at www.misslizsteatime.com, and we'll be talking a little more in the show as we go on. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, it may bring forth dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment and taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you find that the show is not made for you today, I respect those wishes and will see you at a later show at a later date and time. Now, a little bit about my guest who's waiting in the back room. I have Penelope Holt. She was born and educated in England and now lives in New York. She is a novelist, playwright, business writer, and marketing executive whose work has been performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, York Art Center, and New York American Folk Theater. In addition to writing fiction, The Angel Scroll and The Apple, based on the controversial Herman Rosblatt Holocaust romance. Holt is a prolific writer, editor, and co-author of non-fiction, including Singing God's Work, The Story of the Harlan Gospel Choir, Emotional Intelligence at Work, and many other works. She is married with 2 children. Let me get her in here and let's spill some tea. Let me get Penelope in here. Welcome, Penelope.
Welcome. I was just thinking you need a good tea for your throat. Honey and ginger and turmeric, a nice green tea, nice chamomile tea.
Yeah, my voice is just a little cracked, but I'm good. I have my honey lemon tea here, so it should help. So Penelope, let's get started with who you were as a little girl and who you are now as a grown woman.
Well, it's funny, as you look back, you see how you've sort of stayed the same. Like a lot of those sensibilities that you have as a child, you still feel like the same person, right? And I think in a way that is, that's the shock of getting older, because you feel exactly the same on the inside and you look completely different on the outside. I always loved reading. I always loved books. I always loved words, talking. I tell the story. My mom said that I could speak in complete paragraphs when I was 2. I was, talking hens and chickens to death at 3. So I was always a big talker. So I've always just been fascinated with words. They're powerful. They're transformative, which we're going to talk about. Shamans use them to change reality for people. You think differently, you speak differently, you become different, you transform. So, but I think I'm still sensitive, still a little thin-skinned, I think, playful. I like to have playful conversations. I think conversations go much better when you're playful, rather than too serious. I could always bounce back. I think I'm pretty resilient. I think I've just learned the power of discipline as I've gotten older, and I've emigrated and I've tried to be brave. I'm not particularly brave physically. Like, I don't like skiing and things and falling off bikes and breaking stuff. But I tend to be pretty brave emotionally and psychologically. It takes a lot to leave your home country, leave your family, leave your culture and travel 3,000 miles to a place where you really don't know anyone. So I think very much the same, but with some big differences. I married someone who was very opposite than me, and so
opposites attract, right?
Opposites attract, and they also drive each other crazy. But I think when you live with someone who's very opposite than you, it can be a challenge because there's a lot of conflict. But you sort of get a 2-for-1 because their qualities rub off on you, and your qualities rub off on them. So that's been. I say if you're going to go into relationships, go into the ones that make you grow.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go into relationships with friends or partners that will hold up a mirror and see yourself, so that you can see yourself, and who will challenge you and give you a different perspective and a different point of view. Because I think there's no point just smoking your own stuff and believing your own propaganda and drinking your own tea.
Yeah, absolutely. Penelope, I like that you said because it actually does give us a different perspective on things, right? Because you might see a 6, the other one, your spouse might see a 9, but you're still, having a different look at life and bringing a good perspective and bringing that to the table.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was the 6 and the 9 flashed when I was talking with my best friend, who's from Mexico. She's one of 8, and that's what her dad always used to do when the 8 kids were fighting. He'd say, give one a 6 and one put it down, and one would see a 6 and the other would see a 9, and then he'd make them go opposite. I thought that was a pretty good parenting technique. If you've got raucous, fractious kids that are falling out, it helps. You've got to understand where the other person's. They call that radical empathy. Radical empathy means that you don't necessarily agree with the person, but you understand their perspective.
Yeah. Because it makes a good conversation too, as well. And we were talking about that before we went live, right? Was the conversation time.
Yeah, it's no point if you're just trying to, knock down somebody else's point of view or could talk them out of it. You can persuade them, you can maybe move them, you can have a meeting of the minds. But if you're coming into a discussion or an argument just trying to prove that someone is bad and wrong, it's not gonna go very far.
I like what you just said, meeting of the minds, because that's a lot to do with your book as well, right? Is the understanding of the mind and life and all of that. So when I say that meeting of the minds, what comes to heart for you, Penelope?
I love harmony. I've spent a lot of my career communicating and connecting, using words to connect. And of course, we use language. We think, and then we use language to express how we think. Yeah. So talking language is actually just expressing our understanding of the world. And so I think to be able to communicate, and I can tell you my view of the world, and you can tell me your view, and then we can have a meeting of the minds. We can learn from each other. We can grow and expand a little bit, because you're telling me things that I didn't know, and I'm telling you things that you don't know. But it's nice when you there's some people you just, for whatever reason, we're conditioned, or we're genetically different and we don't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
But those really good friends are the ones that understand you, and you understand them, and you see the world in a similar way. And those relationships are harmonious, and they're comfortable, and they're comforting. Because I think sometimes in the world, we all sit and think, Am I right? Am I wrong? You know, am I stupid? Did I get this upside down? And so it's nice when there are people in your life that reassure you and think the way that you do. But you don't want to be talking to yourself. You don't want to be in an echo chamber. You always want that little bit of being stretched and challenged. But it's if you're taking a nice long walk on we were both saying how lovely fall is. I love the fall. Yeah. If you're taking a nice long hike with a friend in the fall, it's nice to have that meeting of the minds.
Yeah. Fall is my actual favorite holiday because of the changing of colors, right? It shows us that life changes, you know, and it transforms. And that's one of the words that you gave me for your tea was transform, you know, and we're talking about the changing colors in life and all that. But you also gave me enlightenment and action. So tell me a little bit why you gave me those 3 words for your tea.
Well, because I think that I've been a lifelong learner. I want to understand, you know, I'm curious, like why? Because I think the more we learn both emotionally and intellectually, and particularly spiritually. And I think enlightenment goes to spiritual understanding, right? And I think that the word that they use in tandem with that is transcendence. So the more enlightened you become, the more you're less in the grip of the dark energies, which are ignorance, anger, pettiness, bitterness, right? The more you free of all that and you're in the light, just the better, more peaceful your life is going to be, and the better effect that you're going to have on other people, the people around you. So I love that idea of, I think it's a beautiful word too, the idea that enlightened, that you're going to be like going into the light and, you know, being a body of light or being a light spirit, angelic. I mean, my book's called The Angel Scroll. I love angels. So yeah, I love that. I've always pursued enlightenment. I don't think you can ever catch it, but I like reading the works of people. I like metaphysics and the mystics and the spiritual writers, Buddhist masters and such, who have a degree of enlightenment and kind of give you the roadmap for how to get there.
Yeah.
So people like riding their bike. I like reading about enlightenment. Last time I rode a bike, I fell off and smashed my wrists and wound up with a pin and nails in it, screws.
Yeah, I haven't ridden a bike in a long time. And the last time I rode a bike in Penelope, I got attacked by a bunch of Canadian geese. And I was like, that's it. I'm done.
Oh, did they chase you?
Yeah, they chased me. And I was like, I'm done. I'm doing this again.
Well, people say to me, were you going fast downhill? And I was like, no, I was practically, you know, I was going too slow and I wasn't turning the wheels properly. And I tipped over and my daughter was next to me and she's it cramped me as I fell and it just felt the wrist just break. She's done sports. We were in the middle of a gale actually down in North Carolina. So she's done sports medicine and she was really good. She got me and the 2 bikes back and she gave me a banana and she made a splint using a wooden spoon and cling film, you know, the wrap. Yeah. And when I went up to the urgent care, the doctor said, oh my goodness, this is a great splint. Who did this for you? So
Penelope, I want to get into your book, The Angel Scroll. How long? How did that book come about, and how long did it take you to write it?
Well, I was working on and off for quite a number of years. Because I'm a professional writer, I do it for, you know, I've done it for a living, ghostwriting and co-authoring, mostly in business. I started out as a creative writer, but in order to make a living, I moved into business writing. And you're always at the mercy of your client. It's their book, their ideas, you know, you have to defer. So this book, I spent a lot of time on it because it just had all of the themes and the storylines that I find interesting. It's about a spiritual seeker. She's bereaved. She's young in her 30s. Her husband has died. And she begins to have strange visions. These supernatural realms open up to her. And she is a decent painter, but she channels a masterpiece. And she finds out that it's been prophesized by a Dead Sea Scroll called the Ages Scroll, that there are 3 paintings, and when you put them together, they'll create miracles. And so she goes off running around the world, around Europe and Jerusalem, England, Glastonbury tour, to try and see if they can get these 3 paintings together and figure out what will happen when they put them together. And as she goes around, she meets all of these spiritual masters, a Benedictine monk and a Buddhist monk and a anthropologist of early goddess worship who studies the Druids. So you get all of these great, facts and insights and stories about all of these different faith traditions. And they're all giving her a different explanation of why these supernatural things are happening to her. She doesn't know if it's her grief, if it's just from her unconscious, if it is the prophecy, if there's something supernatural outside of herself. So that's the kind of stuff I'm fascinated in. So I kind of wrote the book that I wanted to read, which meant that I threw some romance in, and I threw in it's a thriller. There's good and evil. They're in a race to get the paintings, and it's very mysterious and it's very spiritual. So it's got a lot of good stuff in that tea bag.
So in those 3 paintings, do they connect like a puzzle? Do they have to get them together, or
there's marks that tell them that they found one of them, but it's not until they put the 3 of them together into a triptych, which means 3 panel, that they actually see the effect. That's putting the key in the lock when they put them all together, and then they find out what happens when they put them together.
Well, and you said you added some romance and some humor and stuff that in the book as well. So How long did it take you to write the book?
I started researching it in the early 2000s, and I finished it around 2022. I had a couple of versions of it, and the final was in 2022. And then, I found a publisher for it, and then they took a year. They don't publish right away, so it was almost 18 months after they accepted the book. In fact, I almost forgot about it, and then it was published in June this year, end of June 2024. So it's a long process, I've self-published books and I've been involved in self-publishing, but this one I wanted to do with a publisher, and but it does take a lot of time. A lot of people are making good money, and they can get their books to market quicker, and they keep more of the profits, and the book marketing that Amazon allows you to do and whatnot is excellent. So, once upon a time, it was, they called it a vanity press. People didn't like to self-publish. People looked down on it. But I think now more and more, there are great books that are being published by independent authors because the economics are better. Like if I buy my books to send them out to people, I get them wholesale, but I have to pay, I've got to pay 50% of the book price so that racks up, whereas if you're publishing the book independently, you're probably getting your books for a couple of dollars, and you can give them away and get them in the hands of people and talking about them and reading them. So there's a lot of, I really, endorse and encourage people. If you want to write a book, I think everybody should. Everyone's got a book in them. And even if you just keep it for your kids and your grandkids or your family, and I think you should do it. And all of the tools are there now to make it worth your while. I would say get a good editor, because invest in a good editor, because no matter how good of a writer you are, there are things that you just miss. In fact, I've got a romance book coming out with Inkspell authors in January, and the editor just sent me the manuscript back, and there's a scene where the husband comes in and he drops his gym bag on the floor, and she wrote, "I thought he left his gym bag in the car with his wife." And I was like, you're so close to it. You miss those little things. And I was like, oh, eagle eye, good catch. So the good editor they'll help you. They'll catch mistakes and then those inconsistencies,
Yeah, because that book is called Polly Wants a Lover, correct? That's
coming out in January. Polly Wants a Lover. Yeah.
So are you excited about that one?
It was, this Angel Scroll is it's not heavy. It's a good rollicking book, but there's a lot of research. There's a lot of serious themes, metaphysics, spirituality. And I just love to write. It's my hobby. Some people do woodworking or knitting, but I just like to write. And there's So I thought, I'll try my hand at romance, because there's a huge demand, especially among women, for all kinds of romance, cozy or supernatural or historical fiction. And so I thought, I'll just see if I can get into this. So I did the first one in a series called Women Who Want. And this one is Polly Wants a Lover, because, Polly Wants a Cracker. I thought it was just a bit silly and fun to say Polly Wants a Lover. So I'm going to start on the second one. And the thing about romance books is they're what we call trope driven. So they're the same themes and patterns, friends to lovers, all kinds of, lost love, second love. So that you have to kind of describe the trope. So they're somewhat formulaic, which it's amazing that people write the same themes over and over, but the books are still very different. It's like, what is it? There are 7 notes or something, and you get all of these amazing songs with just a few notes. So on the one hand, I like that it's easy, that it is formulaic, and you can have fun with that. But at the same time, it can be a little bit limiting. The Angel Scroll is very unusual and creative. There's a lot of very different things in it. But it deals with bereavement and travel and art and religion and faith and transformation and action, taking action. So it's a very unique book. But the romance books are sort of cookie cutter. But it's just fun to do on the side.
When you said Polly Wants a Cracker, that's what I thought of when I found the book. I was like, oh, is that Polly Wants a Cracker? Polly Wants a Lover. I just see this bird, Polly.
Yeah, I was trying to like ring that bell, like they'd say, where have I heard that before?
And well, it brings the humor in as well, right? It shows the lighter side as well. Because romance is light, right? It's not all heavy stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And when you mentioned that, go ahead.
I was just to say, I think the reason that many women like to read romance is that it's not necessarily that they're all happy endings, but there's usually some sense of triumph or growth.
Yeah.
Even if she walks away from the guy at the end, it's because she's strong and independent. And I think there's so much in life that we can't control, or that makes us feel like we're in a small boat in a big ocean.
Yeah.
And I think that romance is appealing because it appeals to, there's romance for men too, but for women, it appeals to the things that make them happy. Relationships, closeness, intimacy, finding meaning, finding support and companionship, all their favorite emotional themes. And then at the end, the heroine usually triumphs in some way. And it just can take you out of all of the kind of the messy, your messy life where you've got a lot of on loose ends. And there's always, if you've got kids, there's cleaning and laundry and kids and grocery shopping and.
Yeah. Well, when you said that there's a high volume of looking for romance, it is true, because I haven't seen too many romance books out there lately. I see a lot of horror and science fiction and fantasy, but I don't see a lot of romance books out there.
There's tons of them, though. There's this sort of the Harlequin, which is the real trope driven, in England, we used to call them body strippers. But then there's all this, the chick lit, chick literature, and there's a lot of romance genres and a lot of good writers. I like Catherine, I think her name is Bybee. I think she was a nurse and she got into romance writing, and she's done a series, tons of series. And you get a really good writer like that who will do 10, 12, 15, 20 books. And they've remember back in the day, it was Danielle Steele.
Oh, yes.
Remember
I've read many of those.
Yeah, she was prolific. And then Jackie Collins, although she was a little more risque.
Yeah.
And so she had all those Hollywood books. When you're writing romance, there's different levels of what they call heat. So there's cozy that are just sort of charming and, romantic, all the way to you get the really steamy ones. What was that? I always forget her name. The one that did 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, yeah. What was her name?
It was, she had initials, right? I always forget the, maybe somebody who's listening in knows, but yeah, so some people are really comfortable, you know, the racier the better.
Yeah.
But I'm old school. I think you have to just kind of keep it, you know, slightly warm, but
Yeah.
no
So
blushing.
I want to go back to the Angel Scroll because I want to get that book out for you. The other one's coming out in January, but the Angel Scroll, what would you like to see happen with that book?
Well, I was actually asked to write a movie script.
Oh,
Someone who was in the business read it and loved it and said I think it would be a great movie. I mean, I started out as a playwright, and so I tend to think in terms of scenes, you know, action movies. And so I was paired up with a really great writing partner who was a TV Emmy award-winning TV director, and she and I worked on it. And talk about meeting of the minds. She and I just hit it off. We're so comfortable with each other. We became really good friends, and we worked really hard, put our heads down, and just finished the movie script. So it's tough to get a movie made, but I I don't know what's going to happen, but I had fun doing the script, and I'd love to see it become a movie. And people who read it say this would be a great movie, because imagine you're describing paintings. So if you could actually see these supernatural paintings that emanate light and heat, and there's sort of the miraculous. There's a lot of sacred geometry in it. There's a lot of angelic imagery. So very, very sort of supernatural and, you know, powerful. You get really powerful energy. So I'd love to just, you always, as a writer, you want your book to find its audience. You know, not every, as we say in Yorkshire, where I'm from in England, there's a pot for every lid, or there's a lid for every pot. So I just want to find my lids, you know, I just want to find I was speaking to one lady who interviewed me. She said, I read it twice. I couldn't put it down. I read it twice. And so you just want to find those people that really love what you've created. So I like to go to book clubs. So if anyone wants me to come to a book club and they can read the book and talk about it with me, I like to do that, because you have intentions when you're writing the book, and then you find out when other people read it, it triggers ideas for them that you hadn't thought of. And that's fascinating, hearing there, especially this one, because it's about someone's spiritual journey. And I'm always fascinated with how people, if they believe in God or they believe in a higher power, why did they believe? How did they get there? You know, what was their journey to get to that? Who was that famous philosopher said that we all have a God-shaped hole in our heart. Is it Blaise Pascal, I think, said that. So, I mean, I know plenty of atheists, or plenty of people who say they're atheists, that they don't feel the need for God. But I see something far more powerful than me every time I open my front door and look outside, or even contemplate my own, you know, body and the birth of my children and all the miracles that we just take for granted. So I'm definitely on the side of a higher power, and I'd like to just hear what other people's faith is, and what comforts them, and what motivates them, and what's their moral framework, and how do they stay optimistic in the face of loss and defeat, or, you know, how do you stay hopeful? Because I think sometimes when you remove God from the equation, it's harder to do those things. It's harder to feel hopeful and optimistic, and to understand that there's a reason for everything that you may not see at the time, but it will become apparent. So I think it's just a much more enlightened, optimistic way of living for people who have that faith.
So Penelope, in this book, there's a lot of truth and history as well, correct?
Yeah. So there's the Dead Sea Scrolls are real. They were found between 1946 and 57. They were a massive trove of thousands of pieces of parchment dating back to the Second Temple period, which I think was about 300 years BC. So scholars were doing backflips, because it was sort of religious, scholarly, cultural find. And they thought that they'd found this other angel scroll called the Angel Scroll in 1999. They said, oh, we've got this lost that's when I heard about it in the 2000s. We found this missing scroll, the angel scroll, but they could never pin it down. So eventually they said, we can't attest that it's real because we've never really seen it. We just heard about it. But I took that idea of the angel scroll, and that I made up that it was real, and that there was a prophecy, and that the prophecy was that these 3 paintings would be like a new gospel for the 21st century, that people were arguing over the Bible and the different interpretations and the meanings. So you'd get these 3 paintings, and the 3 paintings there'd be no confusion, because you would just look at the 3 paintings and you would have a very direct experience. You'd get their message directly penetrating you. And so I just thought that was a lovely idea. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just look at 3 paintings and be transformed, be enlightened, take the proper action. So I used the Dead Sea Scroll that as a jumping off point, and then Claire, my heroine, goes to Jerusalem, and she goes to Glastonbury Tor and finds out all about the Druids. The Druids who create Stonehenge. And I think one of the most charming details of the Druids is the word enchanting comes from, in part, the ancient Druids who were Celts. They used to enchant hillsides, so they would have these perpetual choirs they would walk around the hillsides 24/7 chanting in order to enchant and make the space special. And I never knew that was the origin, that it enchanted really meant that the spiritual chanting had made the place sacred. So that was fascinating. And then she goes to Rome. She goes to Siena, where St. Catherine, the great mystic, lived during the medieval period. She survived the Black Death. So she just sort of encounters all of these different mystics and faith traditions and Buddhism. She meets a Buddhist monk, and so it's just, for someone like me who's curious about that, it was great to research it and then try and create it into a work of fiction.
I could actually see it into a movie. Just the adventures of finding those 3 paintings, and who they meet, how they get to that location and stuff. There's also some reincarnation in the book, correct?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that scholars believed the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by the a sect called the Essenes. And some people believe that Jesus was an Essene. There were 3 main sects. There was the Pharisees and the Sadducees that we know about. He was always fighting with the Pharisees. But there was this other sect called the Essenes, and they were separatists. They lived out by the Dead Sea, some miles away from Jerusalem, and they wouldn't worship in the temple. They thought it was defiled. Now, the Essenes were actually, it's said, scholars claim, that they were influenced by the Hinduism and by the Egyptian mysteries, because remember, Moses was the adopted grandson of the Pharaoh. So he was schooled in the Egyptian mysteries, and he was schooled, which was influenced by Indian spirituality and Hinduism, which includes reincarnation. And so they connect the dots, and they say that the Essenes believed in reincarnation. They did not eat meat or sacrifice animals. That was against their religion. They were very peace-loving. They were very equitable. And so a lot of the great traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Eastern, have reincarnation as part of but it's not known that there is some connection in early Christianity and Judaic studies that tied back through Moses to reincarnation. So that's one of those fun, facts that I wanted to put into the book, because I think it's very interesting, the idea that early Christians who were Essenes may have believed in reincarnation. And so it's in the book. The reincarnation happens in the book, but that was really fascinating reading about that. And some people disagree, because we've got very well established, records, narratives about religion, and people, buy into them. But there are always these fringe theories that, they get pushed to the side. They're not embraced. The Catholic Church shaped Catholicism a lot. It was shaped depending on what the political or the cultural environment was. And so there are scholars out there that believed that Jesus went to India, and because he was in the scene, and because he would have had that link to India. And in the book, my heroine, she keeps dreaming about Jesus in India. She has this dream of Jesus being in India, and she paints it. He's at the book starts. He's at the bedside of a young woman, an Indian woman who's dying, and he doesn't save her. And her husband is crying. He wants him to save her, but he doesn't. And so that's her dream. It's this active imagination. So yeah, there's just a lot of fascinating little themes that are knitted together.
It's amazing that you brought that up, because that was my next question to you was, did Jesus travel to India? Because I found that on your site. So for the listeners out there, did you want to share a little bit about why you have that? And
yeah, it's this idea that he was in a scene and that he was influenced by Hinduism. And in the Gospels, he goes to the temple when he's a boy at 12, but then you don't hear much until he begins his ministry around age 30. So they call those the hidden years. And they sort of say, what did he do during those hidden years? And there's this theory. There's some scholarly research that there's accounts from India that talk about him being there. But again, people argue it. Some people are adamant it didn't happen. Other people lay claim to prove that he did. And so I just thought that was fascinating, that in those hidden years, he would have gone around and, met with other, masters, or traveled in that way. And so there's a book called Jesus in India. But if you don't feel like reading, you and I were talking that people now are, they prefer
audio listeners, right?
Yeah, I'm auditory. I mean, I love to read, but I'm very auditory. I learn through listening. But there's some really good YouTube videos about Jesus in India, and it kind of lays it all out for you. And people do a good job with those videos. They're not always slickly produced, but they tell the story, and they get the facts, and they get the proof, and they get the narrative. And so there are a couple of really good ones that I looked at when I was researching it.
So Penelope, I found something about the Indian religion influencer of the essence. What's that about?
The Essenes. It's the Essenes. It's it's what I was saying, that Moses could not become a ruler because he was found in the bulrushes. He was a Hebrew, but he was a prince, and he would have studied the Egyptian mysteries and Hinduism. And then he freed the Hebrews. He led them out of Egypt, parted the Red Sea, and then we have Mosaic Law, which is the beginning of the first 5 books of the Bible follow. And so Moses is the kind of the cornerstone of faith. And so it's really through his connection to Egypt and India that you get that that notion that the Essenes would have really, a lot of their belief system would have flown through from that. And if some people argue that Jesus was an Essene, some people said he wasn't, because he went to the temple, and Essenes would not go to the temple because they considered it defiled, and they didn't have any kind of animal sacrifice. But he may have been an Essene and bucked the trend, because Jesus went against a lot of teaching at the time. In fact, the New Testament is a lot of the New Testament is him revising or delivering a new message. And in the book, the message, what I love about the New Gospel and Jesus' teaching is, and it's in the book, and it's the reason for the 3 paintings, what the 3 paintings are supposed to achieve, what his 2 commandments were, which were love God and love one another. And in the book, it says, if there'd be absolutely no conflict in the world if we loved God and we love one another. But of course, it's impossible, right? It's such a simple prescription, but it's an absolutely impossible thing to achieve. But in the book, it comes down to that it comes down to the paintings making that possible, to love God and love one another. So I thought things were getting really complicated, and we should just come up with a nice, simple formula to solve all our problems.
So when
2 commandments, 3.
Penelope, when you put these 3 paintings together, does something magical happen? Does it open a gate? Like, is there something that we should be looking forward to?
Well, I can't tell you because it's right at the end of the book. But and that's what keeps you going. You want to know what happens. But hopefully the person reading it, I wanted people to think deeply, from their own side, to contemplate these things and also kind of come to your own conclusions, because it has some interesting questions. And Claire is motivated by grief. She's had this happy life. She's in her 30s. She's a painter. She loves her husband. They go hiking, and he's a teacher, and they just have these happy routines of this wonderful life. And then he dies, and he's all of a sudden, her world is just blown apart. And that's talking about action, right? And the tea, and her world is transformed now. She's gone from this very mundane, conventional. She's having like psychic experiences. She's channeling a masterpiece. She's having visions, and she's grieving. And she wants to believe that she'll find her husband again, and which we all do when we love someone, when we lose someone that we love desperately. All we want, especially early on in grief, all you can think about is, where are you? Where did you go? I want to see you again. Can I see you again? Should I go to a psychic? You're looking for signs, looking for butterflies and dandelions and, whatever symbols, because you got a big hole blown in you, and you want to fill it. And so she's open. So where some people might not think about God or spiritual matters because they're just going along in their life and, making their tea and paying their bills. When you go through something traumatic, illness or loss or, bankruptcy or whatever it is, and things kind of fall apart on you, then you start asking the big questions, because you got to dig down deep and find a way to go on, right?
Yeah.
And that transforms you. That's where the transformation comes in, because the old way of thinking and being and doing, it doesn't work anymore. So you've got to enlarge it, you've got to expand it, you've got to find new ways to think and act and cope.
Yeah. So Penelope, when you're building your characters for your stories, are they resonating with somebody that's in your life or has gone through your life or part of you as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of me in Claire. I'm an amateur painter. I'm a painter, but I'm a writer, but I love to paint. You get a real experience when you paint. You use a different part of your brain. It's a completely different. I think anybody who's got a hobby that they love, if they gardening or painting or woodworking, whatever, it's meditative. It takes you into a different place. So I like the idea of her being an artist, and she is a seeker. And I have been affected by grief. I've lost people that I love dearly, and I know what that has done to me. I know what it's made me contemplate. And, every time I lose someone, I have to dig down and make a conscious effort to stay focused on gratitude and acceptance and moving forward, because it's terrible when you get stuck and you start stagnating and rotting in place, and as much as, and Claire has this problem in the book, that in a way you don't want to move on. You don't want to let go of the person because you feel like you're betraying them, especially if it was a husband or, spouse. But you have to, right? You have to. And then when you move forward and your life changes, you kind of find them in a different way. But you want to hang on to the old way. You want to hang on to the old relationship. But as you move forward, they stay with you, but they just stay with you in a different way. I know anybody who's been through grief, which we all do if we live long enough. And some people are unfortunately experience terrible grief when they're very young. I think little kids who lose parents, such a hard thing. But anyone who goes through grief, they understand the transformation that happens as you wrestle with it and let it change you. And so Claire, there's new love coming into her life, trying to come into her life. She's becoming a different person, but the more she considers new love and becoming a different person, the further she feels away from her husband. So she's got this tension.
Yeah, like the tug of war, right?
Yeah. So she talks to him. She wants to know how she can always keep him with her, but somehow move forward and accommodate all of these crazy things that are, happening to her.
So Penelope, what is it about angels that you love?
I've loved angels since I was a kid. I think just the idea that we can't see them, that they're benign, benevolent, the symbology of angels. I think one of the things in the book is the reason the new gospel is 3 paintings is because back in the Renaissance, before people could read or before the printing press, the only way they could tell the story about Jesus and his church was through these beautiful paintings. So, you go into these great cathedrals in Europe and you see these amazing stained glass. If you go in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and you see Da Vinci's Pieta of the Virgin Mary with the crucified Jesus across her lap, very moving. And, all of the stained glass and the Sistine Chapel, every church, every Catholic church was adorned that way. And of course, the reformers hated it. They thought it was idolatrous. And so they wanted to strip everything. And you get those you get the Baptists and you get the Reformed Church and the Protestant Church. And they're I know your people are from Germany. You get the Lutherans, and it's all very stripped down because they want you to read the Bible and have a personal relationship with God through the Word, through the Bible. And of course, there's great value and merit. But we lose touch with that visual splendor, and we lose touch with what the direct experience when we look at inspirational art, because it opens your soul. You look at it and you transcend. You're moved. When you look at the Pieta in St. Peter's, you're transformed. You're moved by it. It's just, and Gurdjieff said that great works of art they're divinely inspired, right? So that was the idea for the book, that not that the word is not powerful, but it's just another expression of the word, which is to have the 3 paintings.
Yeah. Well, and storytelling was told through art, right? And that's why art is so magical and so inspirational, because it tells a story. And each person that looks at a painting will see something different than the next person, right? It goes back to that 6 and 9, right?
Yeah, they're symbolic, right? And a symbol is something that generates profound associations in you. So if you look at a crucifix, or you look at any kind of a symbol, a swastika, a negative symbol, you have a Superman, a Superman shirt, you have a deep resonance with it. You have a lot of associations. Back in England, all of these massive castles, with the stone castles, and they have these tapestries that they put on the wall. They keep the drafts out. They kind of like their wallpaper. It kept the walls, kept the rooms a bit warmer. They'd have these big roaring fires, but no central heating. It'd be drafty castles, But they also told the story. So you'd have like the Battle of Agincourt. You'd have these great battles, and the tapestry would tell this. They tell the story of the battle, And you forget that before people could read, the only way they did oral traditions. So people would memorize like the Odyssey or, Ulysses. People would memorize and tell it from memory. That's what the Druids did. They didn't write things down. It was all oratory. But the other way was through textiles and paint and carvings and statues and wood, wood carving and ink.
Well, the stories were told in the walls, right? Like, to keep the castles warm, they put them onto the walls, right? The Egyptians, they wrote onto the walls as well, right, to tell the stories. and we forget how simple a story can be told by just looking through the arts, taking that time to pause and look through it and say, oh, okay, what was this message? And I really believe that because we're removing God from everything, that we're falling apart, right? We're losing faith, we're losing hope, we're losing, we're getting frustrated. There's so much division
Yeah.
that we need to start bringing it back. And maybe we need to start bringing it back through the arts and storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think the postmodernism, which is this period, postmodern period, I think started, became very prevalent in the 60s. And the idea of, you have the grand narratives, right? The Ulysses, the Bible, great literature. And the postmodernists said, no, you can make up your own story, your own interpretation. But to your point, man's earliest instinct, even on cave walls, they find those cave walls in in France, where they've got the earliest drawings. And then back to the Egyptians, they had the hieroglyphics, right? Man wants to tell a story. He wants to memorialize. He wants to pass it on because there's deep meaning in story. And remember Aesop's fables when we were a kid, and the parables in the Bible. They're symbolic stories that have a wisdom and a lesson. And when you start kind of tossing them aside and saying, "Oh, you can make up your own story," or "There's no great narrative," that we should throw that all out. And even in music, the great concertos and sonatas, the 1812 overture, it is to commemorate an event, right? It's telling the story through the music. So I think I think it's good to come together around stories that unite us, that have, and when you look across different cultures, they very often have the same parables and stories. In Africa, they've got a lot of all of the folk tales. The wisdom is embedded in the folk tale, and they're the same across cultures. They're getting at the same wisdoms and the same basic truths about what it is to be human and to make your way in the world.
Yeah. And that's what these tea times are about, right? Is storytelling, getting the stories out there, getting the services and programs and books out there, through a story, through an open conversation, because open conversation is also a story time, communicating with one another and just taking the time to pause. Like I said before we went live, Penelope, my Oma gave me my tea at the age of 4, and it was release, recharge, and reflect. And that's exactly what we do during these conversations and these tea times, right? Is we reflect on your words, we recharge each other through conversation, and we release by giving out the sources and words and stories out there as well.
Yeah, I love what you do. I was telling you, one of the great things of this, of like doing a little bit of a book tour and talking to people on podcasts, because it's a spiritual book. I've had really wonderful conversations. I mean, there's only so much you can say about a book, and I want people to rush out and buy it, but it's the same thing. The book is the same. The story of the book is the same, but you and I were talking about heart-to-heart conversations, and we just don't have, I was joking with my neighbor that I said, I think I live in the Truman Show, because I drive by, I walk by, and I never see any people. We're sort of in a quiet, like a wooded area. But when I was growing up as a kid, like, people were out on the streets. The kids were playing, the women were chatting on the doorstep. You'd have those conversations every day of your life. And now I think that some people do, but I think more and more we're atomized and isolated, and each one of these conversations, I've sort of said, oh, I want to meet a new person and have an interesting conversation and just be open to it. And they've all been really enjoyable. And you and I were also saying that you forget that other people are listening, because because
we get so much into the conversation and we're like, oh, there's people listening.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing all the talking, you're asking the questions, but yeah, it's so nice to because we look at people like they're strangers. Yeah. But then if you have you must find it with all of your guests, you have a deep conversation with someone, or an in-depth conversation, and you're not strangers anymore. You see the common ground. You say, I could be friends with that person.
Yeah.
And I just don't think we do enough of that. We're not being as communal as we should be.
Yeah. Well, it's like back in the day when a new neighbor moved in, right? You made a pie or cookies and you brought it over and you introduced yourself like, hey, I'm your neighbor from 3 doors down. And, if you need a babysitter, we're not doing that anymore, right? We're not connecting. And I think it has a lot to do with the division, all of the coldness and, out there. And I hope that with these conversations together that we can open that door and have these conversations and have people bringing cookies and cakes and saying, you know what, I'm in that neighborhood. Like I live in that area. So like if any of my other Teatime guests live close to you, they could say, hey, Penelope, I was on Miss Liz and, let's have a cup of tea together.
Yeah.
So it's the connections, the bringing people to connect, right? So.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I'm very friendly. When I was a kid, I used to turn around on buses and start talking to people. And my mother would say, sit forward, sit, leave him alone, leave him alone. I just always assumed everyone would want to talk to me, But I find that new people move into the neighborhood and I want to go over and take them some spaghetti sauce or whatever, or a box of tea. But sometimes you get that feeling that people don't want you to intrude. So they're probably sitting there saying, gosh, where's the welcome wagon? Nobody welcome me into the neighborhood. So everybody's sort of hedging and,
on guard, right? Eggshells, like, hey.
And, sometimes I've gone over with cookies or tea or whatever. And I just thought, what the heck if they don't take it in good part, or they give me the evil eye that says, don't knock on my door again. But someone's got to break the ice.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Breaking the ice, having that conversation, opening that door, and allowing someone to come to the table that you might not resonate with, like you said, right from the get-go, right? The opposite attraction brings a different perspective to life and all that. Yeah. So, Penelope, I want to get into your word, because your word that you gave me to describe yourself was curious. And you kind of just shared a little bit about it on the bus as a kid, right? So why that word curious?
I always say, I've said this a million times, no matter who interviews me, I'll say it. Dorothy Parker, who is a great aphorist and wit, said that the cure for boredom is curiosity, and there is no cure for curiosity. I just think curiosity is what moves us forward. We, as kids, we say, why? And then, I don't know, we get to the point where either our brains are stuffed or we think we know everything, or we're just too tired to find out. But we stop being curious, and your life changes. You transform when you discover new things. And sometimes when I get stuck in a rut and I'm having the same thoughts going round and round, I say, what do I have to do differently to think differently, right? How do I get out of this? How do I get an answer, solution to this problem? And so I just want to know things. I don't want to be told. Yeah. I want to learn from authority, but I'm just not going to swallow something because someone says. And now with the internet, oh, what a time to survive. Yeah. I say this, like when I was a kid, we had a library card and an out-of-date set of Encyclopedia Britannica. You'd have to wait 100 years for a new set, so all of your facts were out of date. But now you can go on the internet and you can find out anything. And I was saying to someone that I was chatting with, because of there's grief and reincarnation in the book, these near-death experiences, there's all of these channels with dozens and dozens and dozens of people who've had near-death experiences, and they recount them very sincerely and they're telling that story, Miss Liz. They're telling the story of they truly believe they had this near-death experience, and they can relate to you in absolute detail and with great believability. And it's just fascinating. You can have, years ago, you couldn't have gone on the internet and seen. Now that's going to change I don't care who you are. You may not wind up believing it. You may say, oh, I've seen 97 of these people who've got one of these stories. And this, there's researchers and oncologists and physicians who have done the research and believe it. But just by being curious about it and finding all of that testimony and all of those, it's changed my perspective on it. I used to think I'd heard about it and I wanted to believe it. We want to believe it. But the more evidence that piles up, the more people I see. I don't think I'm being gullible, but I'm getting very persuaded. So right there, just being curious about that one thing is
Makes
transformative.
all the difference, right? It does. It opens that door of transformation.
Yeah. And now you're
Yeah.
ready to believe, entertain. Don't be gullible, don't fall for nonsense. But now you're ready to entertain the idea and think about it, and how would it fit into your life, and how would it change your perspective and how you relate to people, and
Yeah. So Penelope, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, how could they reach out to you?
they go to my website, penelopeholt.com. There's a couple of blogs up there. There's a book trailer. They can see my books, and they can get in touch with me and send me an email, invite me to your book club. I like to hear from people. If you read the book and you enjoy it or you don't enjoy it, I prefer if you did enjoy it and write to me than if you didn't and write to me. But I just like to hear from people. One chap, I was on the radio talking about, what was I talking about? I think Jesus being in a scene and reincarnation. And he'd studied it. He'd studied reincarnation in Christianity. And he sent me this email with this long list of resources and information. I mean, this guy really knew his stuff. So that was, he educated me on it. So that was fun.
Well, it's always nice when you can learn from other people, right?
Oh, definitely.
Opens that door, right? And that communication again, right? Connecting the dots and having that conversation of, oh, I didn't know this. Oh, I'm learning this, learning from one another. I think it's a huge thing. I really want to thank you, Penelope, for joining me on Teatime and sharing your story and your book. For anybody that would like to get the book, where can they get the book?
Well, you can get it if you can get it through a link on my website, or if you go to Barnes and Noble or Amazon or any online bookseller. I think a few bookstores may have it in stock, but they can certainly order it. But most people order their books online, and I think Amazon gets it there pretty quickly. So Amazon is probably the best bet. But check out my website, penelopeholt.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to the listeners out there. Thank you to the viewers on Instagram. I do see you. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you to the people on YouTube and Twitch. We had a couple people as well. So thank you for joining in and tuning in. I could not do this with all of you guys. I will be back tonight at 7 p.m. with the second TEA of this week with a returning guest, Bob Burrell, who is a screenwriter, and he'll be talking about his new book called Lancer's Hero in the West, I believe it's called. So we'll be talking about that and talking about all of the updates that has happened since he's last been on Teatime. So until then, keep serving your tea, keep being real, and keep being true to yourself, and we will all make a difference together, one cup of tea at a time.